Hey there, guys! Welcome to my return to the Mad Chainsaw mode from the Resident Evil 4 Remilk Chainsaw demo. I'm only doing this for the purposes of this retrospective, and to really elucidate upon the fact that everything in this demo was pretty much transferred into the main pre-alpha experience, and to address all the morons who commented on that video titled Resident Evil 4 Remilk is shaping up to be the worst Remilk I've ever played. And we said, oh, it's just a demo, it has nothing to do with the main experience. Those people are fools, who do not understand how the Resident Evil demos work ever since Resident Evil 2 Remilk. Yeah, like, they're showcasing Chapter 1 here. They have all these objectives. If this was not something taken directly from the final version of the pre-alpha, they would not have these objectives. But it is. Like, don't these people pay attention to developer interviews? Don't they actually pay attention to when developers say, oh, the demos are directly taken from the final version of the pre-alpha? I mean, are they serious? How can you be that oblivious? That doesn't make any sense. And I can't believe the developers lied when they said that Mad Chainsaw mode wouldn't be in Resident Evil 4 Remilk. And while there aren't any, like, extreme enemy placement changes, like in this stupid mode, so many of the parameters of Mad Chainsaw mode transferred onto professional difficulty. Like, I predicted so perfectly that Resident Evil 4 Remake was going to be the worst remake of a Resident Evil title I've ever seen. I predicted so perfectly it was going to be the worst title I've ever played in gaming history. Everything I saw in this demo came true in the final version. Hey, look, this is the same enemy behavior that you're seeing in the main pre-alpha. Yeah, so what the hell are people talking about when they say that this demo is not representative of the final experience? Oh god, do these people ever read before they actually post the dumb comments that they post? Uh-oh. Oops. Te vamos a romper en pedazos tu cuerpo. Well, the good news is, with how much I've destroyed the village intro, trying to figure it out in my blind playthrough and also in my worst throughs, I know how to approach it now for this chainsaw demo. I mean, this demo literally released weeks before the main pre-alpha released, and people already had access to the pre-alpha early. So what exactly could they possibly fix with this demo? I mean, people have no sense when they're saying, oh, the demo's not representative of the final experience. Do they not understand how game development works? Okay, but I gotta remember, I can't kill these guys because I have to kill the Chainsaw Man first. It was so poorly programmed, it practically became the archetype for a lot of the special enemy types in Resident Evil 4 Remake with their broken designs. Now I can at least get started on this. It's so dumb how when you just step into this general area, even when enemies aren't looking, they just know where you are. Like, I don't understand why the face validity of this section initially is presented as a stealth sequence, when stealth kills don't contribute to the kill counter, and you can't sneak past this entire area to just move on to Chapter 2, because you get put into combat even when the enemies can't see you, if you just step into certain zones. The fact that the precedent set at the start of this pre-alpha is that the stealth is invalidated as a mechanic, despite the marketing glamorizing just how important the stealth would be, is so bizarre. I don't understand how you can make that kind of mistake with advertising a mechanic and then invalidating it on the very first chapter. Okay, but this guy's coming. Just gotta get behind him. Oh, what the hell? Oh, come on! Are you kidding me? Oh, come the... Oh my god. This is what I mean, guys. Like, this whole ambiguity on the stun system, the fact that they've made the stun system so gamey and artificial for no particular reason, and it's all dependent upon arbitrary damage values rather than actual consistent, believable feedback. I mean, you're forcing the player to rely upon exploits like crazy to even get certain objectives done, and you have all the problems with the combat mechanics that are all preserved on the main pre-alpha. All the problems that are in the main pre-alpha started with this demo. And yet people want to say, oh, it's just a demo. You can't say anything that is shown in this demo is representative of the final experience. I mean, it's just seriously dense of these individuals to say that. And remember, guys, Mad Chainsaw Mode removes all the checkpoints in this demo, and that got transferred onto professional difficulty. The arbitrary stun thresholds for the enemies, and they just don't flinch from your shots whatsoever. Like you're back in the 90s era where games didn't have any stun systems, and they're trying to use that kind of framework to complement a supposedly faster-paced title. I mean, that's literally the clashing of Resident Evil 1 Remilk and Resident Evil 2 Remilk mentalities combined with Resident Evil 4 OGs. Like, the clashing of those two particular mentalities is what makes up the general combat and general flow of gameplay and enemy designs in Resident Evil 4 Remilk. Also, why is it that they barely introduce you to any enemies before the actual combat encounter in the village? Like in Resident Evil 4 OG, they actually took the time to introduce the player to a couple of enemies so that you had a general grasp of the gameplay before the ultimate encounter with the villagers in that village siege. And Resident Evil 4 OG only ever needed a couple of enemies because of how reliable the flinch animations were, how much that game prioritized the polish of the mechanics, and how they complement the overall framework of combat encounters, rather than the artistic designs of enemies and environments. Hell, even the art direction of Resident Evil 4 OG makes so much more sense with the village entrance than here. Because why do you do that car ride in Resident Evil 4 Remilk, and for some reason the main road ends at the front yard of some random villager's house, and to even get to the village square area, you have to pass through the villager's house and jump through a window. There's no back door or anything. There's no way the village was ever designed like this before Osman Sadler. It doesn't make any sense. And then when Leon is dealing with his first villager in Resident Evil 4 Remilk, the design of the villager doesn't make any sense. He has red eyes. He has no expression on his face. He has disheveled facial features. Leon was just trekking through a large space. I mean, not really that large because it's a pretty narrow space with like buildings on either side and like statues, candles, barbed wire, blood, animal carcasses. I mean, those are all designs that should make Leon very wary of the villagers that he's encountering, and yet for some reason when he goes to greet the first villager, he's like, sorry to barge in like this. Have you seen a police officer come this way? I mean, come on, dude. I mean, there are clear indications that something is off with this person, and you're just acting like he's a normal person. Whereas in Resident Evil 4 OG, it made so much more sense with the way the villagers looked, because one of the main selling points of the Las Plagas being a BOW was their ability to hide in plain sight. Like, the actual infectees, they were unassuming. I mean, you could look at them and they just looked like normal individuals. You didn't realize that they were infected by parasites. That was one of the main selling points of the Las Plagas as BOWs. And then the art direction and the environmental designs with the way the village looked, it complemented that story direction with the Las Plagas. But in Resident Evil 4 Remilk, it's like the developers, they played Resident Evil 4 OG back in 2005, but didn't bother playing it again for the purposes of developing this Remilk. And so they completely forgot how the Las Plagas were represented in Resident Evil 4 OG. And so the art direction and the environmental direction and the enemy design direction, they don't complement each other very well. And I can't help but feel like a lot of that improper blending of mentalities bled into the actual gameplay designs of Resident Evil 4 Remilk, which is why this title plays so much like a pre-alpha, like it's really unfinished. And it only makes sense to call it unfinished if the stun systems are as bad as they are. I mean, how can enemies just run through your shots. These guys pretty much have the same physiology as human beings, right? And they don't flinch at all. Like they just literally run through your shots like you're back in the 90s era, and it only serves to complement how broken the other designs are. I mean, when you look at how broken the combat is, when you look at how broken the other mechanics are, seeing those moments where the enemies just run through your bullets, it really comes across as broken. Like, there is nothing about the enemy designs put in place here that complement the combat designs and the environmental designs at all. And I can't believe people defend this. Like, people like Under the Mayo, for some bizarre reason, defend this really bizarre choice. He's defending an unfinished design, and he's calling it intentional. I just don't get it. And going back to what I said previously about how this pre-alpha doesn't introduce you to enough enemies before introducing you to the village siege, relating this to Resident Evil 2 Remilk, for instance, you didn't need to deal with a bunch of zombies before the eventual encounter with the zombies in the RPD, because the zombies were very basic in their designs, and they only ever did one attack. Like, there was no complexity to the enemy design, so they didn't need to introduce you to multiple enemies. Whereas here, because they're using the framework of Resident Evil 4 OG's enemy designs, and Resident Evil 4 OG's enemy designs are a lot more complex than any of the other enemy designs put in place in the prior Resident Evil games, you need to have the right number of enemies for the player to deal with so that they understand the general nuances of the combat, the enemy designs, the enemy attacks, a lot of the other fundamental mechanics. I mean, the way they've done the combat in this pre-alpha, especially for a Resident Evil Engine title, I mean, it's very different to the prior Resident Evil Engine titles beforehand. Like, this is a completely different take on the combat. I mean, it's not really a different take, though, because, again, they've just taken the same like mentalities they had with Resident Evil 2 Remilk, and they've tried to blend it into Resident Evil 4 OG forcefully. Like, it's very jarring. Like, you don't combine those two kind of mentalities together because they represent two different frameworks of titles. Like, they're diametrically opposed mentalities. You can't combine those two mentalities together because it leads to this mess of a combat system that is prevalent throughout Resident Evil 4 Remilk. And again, the demo showcases this. The demo that people thought wasn't representative of the final version of the pre-alpha that we got, it was representative of the final version. I mean, this is how it's always been since 2019, for crying out loud. I mean, I just don't understand why people don't grasp this. I mean, it just really doesn't make any sense. But let's just see how this sequence goes again. Alright, I've got to kick this ladder down because I need the chainsaw man to come upstairs. Here he comes. He's not gonna get stunned. Oh no, he got stunned. Okay. Oh, he's dead. Okay. But see, like, that is a great example of the kind of enemy designs that just got transferred onto Resident Evil 4 Remilk. I mean, this guy doesn't flinch whatsoever. He has all sorts of absurd capabilities that don't make sense. And he's supported by other enemy types that are so broken with their capabilities. I mean, without relying upon the framework to Resident Evil 4 OG's combat systems that actually complement the actual designs put in place with this village encounter, I have to rely upon exploits. People don't understand what you have to go through before you start relying upon exploits like this. People don't understand the kind of broken designs you have to go through repeatedly over and over again to start favoring these kind of strategies. I mean, when you start developing your fundamental designs like this through a very broken framework, you're forcing the player to rely upon exploits like this. And even that method for dealing with the Chainsaw Man, where I just stand behind it because for some reason the developers didn't put in some kind of back attack for the Chainsaw Man to use. I mean, they most likely did that because they had no reason to contribute to him any further because they've already made him very broken as he is with his capabilities. But, like, even that method, there's no guarantee that that amount of shots I put into him was going to stun him and put him into the animation where I can punish him from behind with the knife. And why they make it where you can only do knife executions from behind whenever you stun enemies, and even when you shoot them in the leg, you can only do them from behind for some stupid reason, unless you're dealing with very specific enemy types. I mean, there are a lot of very arbitrary and artificial and very gamey and very contrived designs that just make the combat very clunky. Like it's very arbitrary for them to just have it where the knife execution can only be done from behind when you stun enemies. I don't understand why, especially when you're tying it to durability, and then other designs with the knife, like the knife execution animation has really clunky detection, and also when you're trying to break out the grabs and you take instant damage, you're completely devaluing the whole point of that mechanic if you're going to be taking instant damage. I mean, what were they thinking with that? And it's tied to durability again. Why would you set up a grab escape animation that's tied to durability if you're then going to immediately deal damage to the player, regardless of how long the enemy has been holding the player in a grab? The split second that they initiate the animation, you've already taken damage, and it makes no sense. That really doesn't make any sense at all. It's really broken that way, and it completely devalues the whole point of the grab escape animation. And then other designs like that. I mean, back when I did that video, Resident Evil 4 Remilk is shaping up to be the worst Remilk I've ever played. A lot of the new mechanics of Resident Evil 4 Remilk just felt devalued because of how broken the encounter was and with how much they stripped down the enemy designs bare. I mean, it's really feeble of them to do that. And now I have to run the gamut with these villagers, and we get to see just how bad the combat is. Oops. Whoa. At least he punched. Yeah, I gotta remember, Mad Chainsaw mode. The parry system is not just restricted to perfect parries. Like, you don't even have to play the main pre-alpha to see the fundamental errors with it. You just have to play this demo, and you have a better understanding of where the developers' mindsets were, just how high they were when they were designing this. There really is no incentive to partake in a lot of the new mechanics of Resident Evil 4 Remilk in this Village Siege encounter. Trying to partake in them just opens you up to a lot of poor designs. I mean, the Village Siege encounter in Resident Evil 4 OG made you want to understand the combat because of how well designed it was, but there's literally no incentive to, play by the rules of this pre-alpha. It's just better to use exploits and just run around all across the map and just make the gameplay look really silly and really outdated and just really dumb. It's almost like the developers don't respect the original combat systems of Resident Evil 4, and so they opted to make this feel more clunky, just to put Resident Evil 4 OG in a bad light. And I just can't believe people can get behind this kind of unfinished product, and the numerous consequences as a result of new Capcom's poor decision making when designing the combat is absurd. I think I need to kill one more enemy. Okay, that guy was still alive. Oh, that's right, the enemies transform into these, what's the name of this enemy type, exactly? But it's so dumb how this transformed, enemy is the first enemy that you encounter. Because then you have to wonder why Leon is so clueless as to the presence of BOWs in this entire village area. It doesn't make any sense. There he goes, like, look at that. I mean, the stun systems are so awkward in this pre-alpha, and this got transferred onto the main pre-alpha. Again, like, everything you're seeing right here is how the main experience is. And when they tie the stun animations to very specific animations, and then the way the animations look to you is not actually how they're programmed by the systems at play. Like, even though some of the enemies were in running animations, sometimes when you shoot them, they don't flinch properly because the pre-alpha doesn't register them as being in a running animation, and also the enemies have a tendency of canceling their sprint animation for some bizarre reason. Like they'll sprint for a little bit and then they'll just stop, and it doesn't make any sense. And then you have other times where they just continually maintain that constant velocity of sprinting. I mean, there's just a lot of very outdated, artificial, broken, and clunky, uncoordinated designs right here that really make the combat system feel like a joke. It really makes it feel very silly with its implementation in every part of it. And these guys were just standing here for some reason. Okay, and it's done. I mean, this was literally no different to what I did previously. I feel no sense of accomplishment from this. I mean, if you feel any sense of accomplishment from having to use exploits to bypass poor design, something is seriously wrong with you. I mean, this is just so bad. The only reason I was able to get it done now is because I went through that hell of trying to wade through poor designs like crazy just to find some kind of stupid method. There are definitely parts of that video, Resident Evil 4 Remilk is shaping up to be the worst Remilk I've ever played. There are definitely parts of it that could have been better handled, but of course at the time I thought they were important to be included. But I mean, back then I didn't even think my channel could ever be popular, but I didn't even expect that video to get as many views as it did and that many assholes. it's, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous that that video got as many views as it did. And I owe it to Resident Evil 4 Remo for actually popularizing my channel. It's crazy. But yeah, guys, I mean, that's literally all there is to it. The demo for Resident Evil 4 Remilk is representative of the final experience. This released weeks before Resident Evil 4 Remilk officially released. People already had access to the pre-alpha early. I mean, you can't say that there was anything the developers could do to fix this. There is so much that could have gone wrong with what I was doing just then, and it somehow paid off. But let's go through it again. Where intel suggests the kidnapped girl was last sighted, yet he was relying upon eyewitness reports. It really doesn't make any sense why he would be using eyewitness reports. How did they initially find Ashley in this part of rural Spain, and then rely upon the eyewitness reports within Spain to track her down? This is something I really need to look up again when I do my retrospective. I mean, I'm already up to like chapter 2 of the retrospective, but I still need to write the village encounter because there's so much I need to say with that stupid village encounter. And I'm trying to use the village encounter as a way to introduce a lot of the poor designs with the fundamental framework of combat. But trying to write it all down is very difficult because I don't know how best to phrase all of it. But I've listed so many problems. And were those villagers literally hiding behind that secret door the entire time, and there's no back door or anything? You just jump out the window and you're here? I mean, I don't understand that. That doesn't make sense. Like, at least the art direction for Resident Evil 4 OG's village entrance, you know, it really came across like this was a evil that was hiding in plain sight. With the way the Las Plagas were handled, with the way the village looked, and how it looked pretty normal for a rural village area. Until you actually go deeper and you see all the skulls, you see all the dead bodies, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there is just no thought with the way they've tried to use the art direction to complement the story direction with this Remilk. Like, I've already noted problems with the initial introduction when Leon is introducing the events of the prior Resident Evil titles, although he doesn't really do that much, actually. He only talks about himself. And I think one of the most important things to take away from the way the flashback scene with Leon's introduction was done in Resident Evil 4 Remilk compared to what it was like in Resident Evil 4 OG is the focus. Like in Resident Evil 4 OG, with that introduction that he was doing, it was entirely framed around the overarching narrative with Umbrella, and then it leads into the events of Resident Evil 4 OG to establish the status quo. Whereas in Resident Evil 4 Remilk, he talks a lot about the punishing missions, and he went through a supposed level of trauma, and we see Krauser in that introduction, and it's very odd that they were just introduced Krauser like that, when he's supposed to be Leon's mentor for some arbitrary reason in Resident Evil 4 Remilk. It just seems kind of jarring to introduce a mentor figure like that. And it's odd because throughout most of Resident Evil 4 Remilk, the way Leon addresses Krauser, he doesn't really address him like he's a former mentor. There's not really any subtleties with their dialogue that would indicate some former level of respect between pupil and mentor. It really feels like they were just once close associates. It's yet again another example of a jarring form of dialogue. The dialogue doesn't match the idea of a pupil-mentor relationship. It matches the idea of a former close relationship between two allies, like between two associates. And the thing is that the whole idea of Krauser calling Leon a rookie in Resident Evil 4 Remilk, it didn't make any sense to me at all. But it turns out Krauser had the same thoughts in Resident Evil 4 OG as well as in Darkside Chronicles, and he could not really understand why Leon, someone who hasn't really been on the front lines of war as much as Krauser, was getting all this special treatment. And I didn't actually realize that. I mean, I haven't played Darkside Chronicles in a long time, and there's not really a dedicated video on YouTube that showcases all the files, all the cutscenes in a specific way that really lays out that story point well. But obviously, that's on me to recognize that if I actually played through Darkside Chronicles previously. But Krauser did voice dissatisfaction with the way America was being handled. He did voice dissatisfaction with the way Leon was being treated as like a special case, and like he was getting all this special treatment compared to him. And Darkside Chronicles does do an interesting job at conveying Krauser's deeper thoughts. But without Darkside Chronicles to set that in stone in Resident Evil 4 Remake, like without something like that and the way they just retconned Operation Javier for no reason, the way Krauser is portrayed in Resident Evil 4 Remake doesn't make any sense at all. Like, you can't voice that same kind of problem with Resident Evil 4 OG because Darkside Chronicles released after Resident Evil 4 OG. And so, based on that, you can say that with the way Krauser was delivered in Resident Evil 4 OG with his mystique, they were doing that to set up Darkside Chronicles. And they didn't have to follow up on it, but they did. And that was very interesting of them to do that. I mean, this was back during a time where Resident Evil was actually caring about the overarching narrative that they set up. And for them to expand upon Krauser like that was very interesting. And then with him finding Wesker and that tying into the interesting character dynamic we get between all the characters in Resident Evil 4 OG, with the connection between Leon, Ada, Wesker, and Krauser, like each of them all tie back to Wesker. Raccoon City was indirectly caused by William Birkin, who formerly worked with Wesker. Wesker contributed to T virus development and the progenitor virus, and he himself was injected with a form of the progenitor virus to become the superhuman that he was, to become that kind of ultimate BOW. Ada was working for Wesker. I mean, they were both working for the rival corporation, but the rival corporation didn't trust Wesker during Resident Evil 4 OG, and so they asked Ada to backstab him. And then Krauser found himself working for Wesker, and Wesker healed him, and Wesker had that same misanthropic view, and through that, this would complement Krauser's hatred of America, and also Krauser would act very arrogant and saying that, oh, he knows Wesker, but Ada says, oh, I've known Wesker longer than you. I mean, there are some very interesting relationships to explore right there in Resident Evil 4 OG, and they just completely ruined all of that in Resident Evil 4 Remake. Now Krauser knows nothing about Wesker. He's just a mindless soldier. He's just a foot soldier working for the Los Illuminados, and now it just presents as weird. Like, why do the Los Illuminados, a Spanish cult, have this random American soldier working for them? And Wesker is an idiot in disclosing his plans to Ada. Ada's an idiot as well in Resident Evil 4 Remake, and any sense of substance with their character is just stripped away in Resident Evil 4 Remake. Leon is the biggest dunderhead of all, with the way he just lets Ada go, with how little he comprehends the situation, and that he's just not quick to catch on as expected, as Krauser said in Resident Evil 4 OG. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, they ruined such an interesting character dynamic, and I think it speaks high volumes as to how compromised the entire Remake storyline is. And relating back to Leon's introduction, there's a reason why he doesn't talk about a lot of the story points from Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 3 Remake when he should be well aware of them. And it's because of the lack of story present with those games. I mean, I already acknowledged this when I played through Resident Evil 2 Remake, but there was just no story in Resident Evil 2 Remake. So many of the story points were just lost. And it was just a series of bullet points happening without any kind of story to tie them all together. And I guess that's what they had to work with when they were designing the story of Resident Evil 4 Remake, and that's why a lot of the character interactions are stripped down so hollow. It's all very interesting to consider when you're thinking about the complex designs of storytelling and art direction and character designs. And once again, a lot of this bled into the combat systems of Resident Evil 4 Remilk. So yeah, it's all a big mess in every aspect of Resident Evil 4 Remilk. I mean, I genuinely cannot believe that people defend this free alpha and somehow consider the story amazing. I mean, already when they're introducing fantasy aspects and enemies just getting all these bizarre capabilities, and they've taken elements of the Mega Mycete and put it into Salazar's mutation and Sadler's mutation, and this whole hive mind aspect with the Plaga that feels so fantastical in its interpretation. I mean, when they're already introducing fantastical aspects with the Plagas in Resident Evil 4 Remake, how can you possibly say that the story is somehow better than Resident Evil 4 OG? That doesn't make any sense. Oh, there we go. Look at that bullshit. The sequence will not end until I kill this guy. And unfortunately, that right there was problematic. But that kind of bullshit with the flash grenades is apparent throughout a lot of Resident Evil 4 Remake. I mean, not really a lot, it's really during certain sequences, but you know, the Brute has that same problem in the cabin sequence when he's mantling through the window. Even when he's completed the mantle animation of going through the window, if he's just standing still and not moving after he mantles through the window, and you throw a flash grenade, he will not get stunned. It's very broken that way. I mean, old Capcom would have been very tight about those kind of designs, but new Capcom is just not very tight with those kind of mechanical problems. I mean, it's ridiculous. Also, guys, can I just say, another thing that doesn't make any sense about this new design with the Ganado, with their red eyes, disheveled facial features, lack of expression on their faces, and other bizarre behaviors with them. If that's meant to be the final stage of subordinate Plaga infection, how could they infect Ashley and expect her to be a sleeper agent then, if she's going to have those kinds of noticeable deformities with her features? If that's really the final stage of subordinate Plaga infection, like, it doesn't make any sense in that regard. I'm surprised they didn't consider that with the art direction of the Ganados. Like, you see what I mean when I say the art direction of the Ganados doesn't complement the story direction with the Las Plagas, and how the Los Illuminados were trying to use Ashley as a sleeper agent to implant a mole within the US government. I mean, that really doesn't make any sense. Like, already that story point is violated by the way the final stage of the subordinate Plaga infection works. If Ashley was going to have red eyes, disheveled facial features, lack of expression on her face, and other bizarre behaviors, how could she possibly pass off as a sleeper agent? It doesn't make sense. Yeah, improve storytelling, my ass. When already that art direction doesn't work very well in complementing that story point of the Los Illuminados trying to use Ashley. I mean, it's ridiculous the amount of things I already have to say in the first couple of moments playing Resident Evil 4 Remake. I mean, I'm already up to like 26 pages. And that's including the bullet points I've made for the Village Siege encounter. But I've said a lot before I've even gotten into Resident Evil 4 Remake, and you'll understand what I mean when I showcase them. I don't know how long the initial introduction to my Resident Evil Village retrospective was before I finally got to the Village Siege, but I don't think it was as long as that, honestly. I mean, my Resident Evil Village retrospective was 166 or like 168 pages, I believe. But I bet my Resident Evil 4 Remake review will be either the same amount, or it'll be like 500 pages, because of how much Resident Evil 4 Remake has ruined Resident Evil 4 OG and ruined Resident Evil as a brand. I mean, Resident Evil was already ruined the moment Resident Evil 2 Remake came out, and Resident Evil 4 Remake was just following that downward trend starting from Resident Evil 2 Remake, but it was of a much steeper decline in quality. But going back to my Resident Evil 4 Remake retrospective, I think one of the other reasons why it will be very long is because I'm not only critiquing Resident Evil 4 Remake, but I'm also critiquing Resident Evil 4 OG. And I'm also doing Separate Ways OG and Separate Ways Remake. I've already promised the people that voted in that one community post that I would be combining Resident Evil 4 Remake and Separate Ways Remake into one retrospective. But I've also seen it as an opportunity to critique Resident Evil 4 OG and Separate Ways OG. So I'm effectively critiquing 4 different pieces of content, pretty much, in one retrospective. So I imagine that alone will make it like 500 pages, at least. Of course, that's depending on how I phrase the information, or if I choose to go on a little side tangent talking about the way a story point was handled in like Separate Ways Remilk, and talk about a file, then when I get to Separate Ways Remilk overall, like when I get to that part of the retrospective, I can ignore that, and then talk about the other parts exclusive to Separate Ways Remilk. And the same case with Separate Ways OG, so in that sense, it wouldn't be too long. I think it can work out. Hold on, let me use my pistol instead. Oh, look at that. The pistol is somehow more effective than the shotgun at stunning this guy, and at least putting him into the animation where I can use the knife execution. Uh-oh. How did I survive? I don't know how I did that just then. That was weird. I got iframes for no reason. And they're all transforming again. Which is fine because their movement is slowed. But this is not how the enemies are handled. Like, the behavior of the enemies is not exactly like how it is on professional difficulty. Okay, and he's dead. And I couldn't get away. And it's really stupid how the deflection is not omnidirectional, because the number of times I end up having to move away from attacks during, like, spur of the moment. Because a lot of times when human beings are doing actions, they're doing it off of reflex, not really off of thought, and kind of have to do it off of reflex a lot of the times, but even then, like, the fact that they can't even do something as simple as make the deflection omnidirectional so that you're not getting put into those situations where being off ever so slightly can allow the deflection to not work and give the enemies a cheap advantage. That's just really stupid. And the thing is, the deflect issue is fixed in Resident Evil 4 Remilk VR, but you can't really apply a VR experience to the overall experience. Yeah, that is just so weird how this guy has like a turning animation. Like, he can do a quick turn when you're behind him, but the Chainsaw Man doesn't. So it's almost like they knew that the Chainsaw Man had this vulnerability, but they put it in. So they're wanting the player to embrace exploits so that they can deal with them. I mean, that alone should convince you that New Capcom simply viewed Resident Evil 4 Remake as a joke, and that they viewed the poor designs as a test of skill. Like, they wore those poor designs as medals. And they used those poor designs to complement the supposedly difficult experience of Resident Evil 4 Remake. I mean, I seriously do not understand what they were thinking. I don't understand why they think having functional gameplay designs and believable stun animations like Resident Evil 4 OG makes the experience bad. There are many ways to make an experience difficult and still make the game functional at the same time and believable with its stun animations. I mean, look at Resident Evil 5 OG. Professional difficulty was exceedingly difficult in Resident Evil 5 OG, but they took the time to make the systems reliable. You know, there were a lot of moments where you could use the enemy behaviors to your advantage. You were able to take advantage of the environment very well, so that's at least complementing that design with moving around the environment and trying to make sure that... Okay, and he's just thrown a projectile from close range. Like, the enemies could kill you so fast on professional difficulty. You practically went into the dying state in one hit most of the time in Resident Evil 5. And then with Evil Within, you died in one hit. Like, they had so many cool designs with the evil of them. So many creative designs. They didn't need to make the sun systems really comical, tedious, clunky, uncoordinated, broken, outdated, all this kind of stuff. Like they didn't need to do anything like that and just strip the gameplay bare to make the evil within supposedly difficult. They actually chose to embrace very creative designs. They actually chose to fleshing out the enemy designs and make the player study up on the encounters to know how to implement those designs very well. And you died in one hit, and there were some really grueling enemy encounters. Grueling is the wrong term. Like there were some very difficult enemy encounters. Grueling would imply that they're poorly designed, but they aren't. I mean, there is so much experimentation involved with the weaponry and the evil of them, and the way the crafting system is handled, the way the flinch animations are handled, the way the enemy diversity is handled, the way the enemies are utilized in their environments. I mean, there is so much intelligence in the evil within, and that's why I give that game a 9.9 out of 10. I mean, it's one of the greatest survival horror games I've ever played, alongside Resident Evil 7. And it's honestly better than Resident Evil 4. I would definitely consider the Evil Within to be Shinji Mikami's magnum opus. But the fact that Anpo-san, the original director of Resident Evil 5, took the wrong sources of information when he was designing Resident Evil 4 Remilk, and instead he took what he learned in Resident Evil 2 Remilk and arbitrarily applied it to Resident Evil 4 Remilk, and he's ruined so many of the story moments, so many of the character moments, so many of the gameplay moments. It's shameful. Like, how the mighty have fallen. And I said this 8 months ago, back when I did that video of Resident Evil 4 Remilk is shaping up to be the worst remake of a game I've ever played. I still say that to this day. Like, Ampo-san has become one of the worst directors ever, and apparently Resident Evil 4 Remilk has had 4 directors. You have Ampo-san and Kadoi-san directing the main experience for Resident Evil 4 Remake. You then have Kawano, I believe, like Kawano, who was the one who directed Separate Ways Remake, and then you have some other director handling the VR mode. Like, why does this pre-alpha have so many directors? The amount of times inconsistencies can be apparent throughout these modes. The amount of times a lot of the direction can feel shifted around for no reason. I mean, that's mainly down to the writers, not really the directors, but that alone should convince you that this pre-alpha had a lot of compromised designs. I mean, like, even beforehand, like, the fact that they split the development team into 3 different teams and they were handling the island, the village area, the castle, that alone should be conspicuous enough to convince you that this pre-alpha had compromised development. And that compromised development led to them taking influences from the wrong sources, and they just chose some of the most pathetic routes when designing the difficulty mode for Resident Evil 4 Remake, leading it to be a very broken experience, a very improperly thought out experience. And my poor designs of Resident Evil 4 Remake series, my poor designs of Separate Ways Remake video, and the eventual poor designs of Resident Evil 4 Remake VR series that I'm going to do really highlight just how broken and fundamentally compromised Resident Evil 4 Remake is. And Carcinogen SDA is the only other popular YouTuber who understands this. Under the Mayo and Ballback Soup have kissed the developers' asses way too much. They've literally become sellouts. I can't believe they like this pre-alpha and they defend it, and they've even done their little reviews praising the poor designs. Well, I'm about to shatter their expectations. I'm gonna blow those fake reviews out of the water with my own retrospective. Now that I have so much of a breather to contribute to the retrospective, I am going to do it. And that's all I have to say right there. But this has been my replay of the Chainsaw demo for Resident Evil 4 Remake. Definitely not as bad now that I've actually, I mean, I can't really say that, oh, because I've gone through it, it's automatically good. It's still bad. It's still just as bad as how it was back when it first released. Only I've just applied better knowledge to it because of how much I've just broken the village encounter down to such a rudimentary level to just obtain so much technical knowledge to apply a lot of exploits and a lot of dumb stuff like that. I mean, they use poor design to justify the supposed difficulty in Mad Chainsaw mode. And everything that they showed with Mad Chainsaw mode got transferred onto professional difficulty, minus some minor things, but it's still effectively Mad Chainsaw mode, just with a different name to it. That name being professional difficulty. Yeah. What a shameful mode. What a pathetic mode. What a pathetic pre-alpha. What a pathetic development team. This has pretty much given me more of an urge to contribute to my retrospective, and yeah, I'm going to continually update you guys on my retrospective on the community page, and I'll even release short snippets of my retrospective on my channel when possible, just like what I did previously with my Resident Evil Village retrospective. So, thank you guys for watching, and you take care now.